So, periodically, this time of year I start reading up on all the things that the UUA sends me on stewardship and links to different articles. And, periodically they all say, that the Unitarian Universalists on a whole are less generous than members of other denominations. And, I tell this to people, and they say, well, that's because you don't threaten them with going to hell if they don't give you money, And that's true from both our Unitarian and our Universalist religious heritages. The Universalists believed in universal salvation for all, and the Unitarians generally profess, as the 19th century Unitarian minister, the Reverend William Ellery Channing would always put it, salvation through character. So the promise of a good afterlife in exchange for your 10% pledge is not something that we could promote with integrity. Another conversation which even made me think about how different we are was my son's friend who's visiting with us from out of town. And I, of course, invite him to come to service. I invite everybody to come to service I meet. And his first question was, well, does your church take confession? Now, I knew he had grown up Catholic, and I told him, well, no, but if you wanted someone to talk to about something that you've done or a decision that you're struggling with, or if you don't want to talk to me, one of our pastoral associates would be happy to sit down and talk with you. And his response was, so if I confess, am I going to be forgiven for my sins? I told him, no, it's not the way it works around here. So no, we don't promise you eternal salvation after you die, or even cosmic forgiveness in this life. Why should you consider being so generous with your pledge? And so I think it's exactly for those reasons why you should be as generous as you can be with your pledge. Because we offer no easy promises or supernatural intervention. What we do offer is a way to be a part of creation. Creation of the beloved community. A community in the here and in the now that can be transformative in your life and in the larger community. We create an environment that allows for religious and spiritual exploration, so that each of you, as our mission says, can embrace individual searches for meaning. We create an environment and structure that allows us to live out our vision of becoming a congregation that, as our vision states, and I quote, supports social justice and social action initiatives in our congregation and the greater community, and encourages responsibility for the earth and its creatures, end quote. We just had a great program last night. Ed Fallon from Des Moines was here talking about the Great Climate March. And we can see, we can see the creation of these kind of programs and the social justice actions that originate from our congregation. The question often, though, is asked, how do we create, and also, more importantly, I think, how do we sustain an environment that transforms lives? And part of it, I think, is just the recognition of the naming of what we are doing. Recognition of the possibilities in the world. Recognition that ours is a religion for the type of society that exists today in the world. A society diversity to come together as one. A while back I was reading a book by Peter Block called Community, and its subtitle was The Structure of Belonging. Belonging. I'd like you to just let that word sit with you for a minute. Belonging. What do you long to be in the world? How do you long to be in the world? With whom do you long to be in the world? Think about what those things are for you. What does it mean to just be longing just to be, to exist, to be authentic to who you are, to who you are at the core of your very being, shedding the grit and the challenges of the world that have hardened and hidden the authentic you, to start even to recognize what the grit and those challenges were that formed you and shaped you to who you are today. Because if you are authentic, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune or someone's differing opinion do not force us into a reactionary position, but rather allows us to be open to dialogue because we know who we are. We become defensive and argumentative when we are insecure. Authenticity is what we strive for in this world, in this congregation, and in our lives. And each of us is sometimes more and sometimes less successful in its application. And it's why we are also people of the covenant, right? So that when we do fall short, we can be brought back to covenant as a reminder to what we hope for or imagine our best selves to be. But I want to focus today on the type of environment that fosters creativity, change, and depth of meaning. I believe in the deepest part of my heart that the way that happens is through loving engagement. Peter Block speaks of 4 things to create transformative community. 1, ownership. 2, having a transcendent purpose. 3, acknowledging our gifts. And 4, welcoming. Now, ownership seems simple enough. Within our team structure, teams are empowered to offer programs to the congregation, particularly for people new to our religion, maybe for those who have been here for a long time. That is something different than what they're used to. Not everything is from top down. It comes from the ground up, from everyone here. Ownership requires, though, accountability and collaboration, and a reminder that each of us, each and every one of us here, are creators of our community. What we create here in community is, in effect, the creation of our values in action. And so for every program you want to create, Block suggests asking 4 questions. 1, how valuable an experience do you plan for this to be? 2, how much risk are you willing to take? 3, how participative do you plan to be? And 4, to what extent are you invested in the well-being of the whole, as opposed to what just is your personal thing? Is it right for the whole? There's no one right answer to any one of these questions. Of course, not everyone lives with the same circumstances. Not everyone has the same tolerance of risk that others have. But ultimately, we as a congregation are created by the programs that you create, that you participate in. You know, when I talk about welcoming later, yes, it would seem ideal if someone would just invite you to do this, especially for new people, right? And so I want you all to consider this an invitation. If you have an idea of something you are passionate about, let me know. Let other leaders in the congregation know about it. Peter Block says, and I quote, "We have to realize that each time people enter a room, they walk in with ambivalence, wondering whether this is the right place to be. This is because they believe that someone else owns the room," end quote. So for introverts, that's a hard thing to do, isn't it, right? But I encourage you, if you feel moved about something, if you're passionate about something, if you want to better the well-being of the congregation with your gifts, then if you want to explore how to integrate your gifts, sometimes you just have to ask. And there's a risk in that. I admit that. There's a risk. Someone might not like your idea. That's possible. Or worse, someone may not listen to your idea. Or even worse, someone may ask you to volunteer to implement your idea. Thus, that's why the participative question was in there, right? So, how participative do you plan to be? For someone new, though, that can be very, very off-putting. But that is the risk, right? All growth, all ownership requires risk. It requires discernment from those who have already walked the path, and as well it requires a fresh look from those who are just starting on the path. With each new person who enters our doors, we are changed by their input. And nothing stays the same in the world, in this congregation, in our lives. And this is just as hard for long-term members as it is sometimes for newer members. But it's a reminder that we are all in this together. And for us to be truly transformative, we must all participate in the ongoing creation of the congregation. It's the same way when you say somebody's thinking about becoming a member. What do you risk by becoming a member of this congregation? You risk the safety of certainty, maybe. To risk losing simple answers to ambiguous and challenging questions. To risk anonymity, for we will ask you to share your journey with us. To risk the status quo, for we will ask you to be open to others who may not think exactly as you do, and we ask you to be in right relationship with them. You risk being changed. You also risk changing others. Now, I know people do not join a congregation in the hopes that someday they will be blessed to make coffee for other members of the congregation. Now, I want you to know, when I said this morning, someone after service came up and said, no, I really love making coffee for others. So we all have to, so therefore we should not judge what other people's intentions are, I found right then. But we have to know what we are passionate about. Some people are coffee artisans, clearly. And sometimes it may seem like a simple task such as that. But sometimes just by doing the simple tasks, the simple act of serving others and connecting with others can make us feel a part of something larger than ourselves. And that is the part, I think, of what is meant by ownership. That by your actions, small and large, you become and you shape and you create something larger than just your own concerns. You learn to care, to love, to create, to be a part of a community. And that in and of itself is transformative. Secondly, he spoke of having transcendent purpose. Clarence Stone said, and I quote, "When you discover your mission, you will feel its demand. It will fill you with enthusiasm and a burning desire to get to work on." End quote. And so I ask you to think about, how do you want to live out your Unitarian Universalist religion and its beliefs? What are you called to do as a member of this congregation? What are we called to do as a congregation to create what would make a difference in the larger world? What can we create together that we cannot do alone? And if we understand the why, the how will fall into place very easily. To understand that this as community requires us to come together in the many ways available, to build relationships with each other, to learn to get to know ourselves and others deeply, and that makes answering those questions easier. Our passions in this congregation seem to be around religious and spiritual exploration, social justice, and relationship building. And I think just like a chair, if you take out any one leg out, it cannot stand up. All three need each other. Explore. Go deep. And by going deep together, you will find your transcendent purpose. Now, the third item he lists is our gifts. Now, usually during this upcoming time of year, the annual pledge drive, we often hear the phrase to act from a mindset of abundance and not scarcity. And I actually like that phrase very well, but I also want to share with you some of the questions that Block asks, which are, he asks us to consider what gifts we have received from others here in the congregation, and what unique gifts have you shared with others. What is unique about the gifts that we could possibly offer as a congregation to the larger community? And I thought this next one, what is the gift that you hold in exile? But I think an even deeper question is, what is the gift that we have that we don't know about or acknowledge in ourselves? What do we risk in exploring that question? Often the thing we fear most is the thing that we desire the most. Right? We fear that deepness, that wholeness that comes from finding our authentic self. For if we reach it, and if we reach for it and come up short, or if we find out we are wrong, we somehow think that our hope, that very being, will be crushed. But if we know who we are, that cannot happen. As Shakespeare said, and I quote, "A coward dies 1,000 times before their death, but the valiant taste of death but once. It seems to me most strange that humans should fear, seeing that death, the necessary end, will come when it will come." End quote. So let us not fear what we hope to become, individually or as a congregation. Let us keep on moving forward toward the creation of the beloved community. And lastly, I will mention briefly welcoming, or what Bloch would call invitation. Bloch states, and I quote, "Invitation is the means through which hospitality and community are created. It is an act of generosity, a call to create an alternative future, to join in the possibility of what we have declared." End quote. It's why we say the words at the beginning of each service, so that someone who walks in here for the first time knows the baseline of who we say we are. And then it is up to us, of course, to then live out what we say we are. Right? And then our goal should be to help connect that newcomer so we can learn from each other. And every week then has the possibility of new creation. Bloch says, I quote, "An authentic community, congregants decide anew every single time whether to show up. If they do not choose to show up, there are no consequences. They are always welcome." End quote. And people always have a choice to say no or yes. And our goal is not to bend people's arms. Our goal is to welcome people with open arms and with an open mind and with an open heart. Both newcomers and people who've been coming here for 50 years, it should be the same. And then each person has to choose whether to engage or not. And I can promise you, if you risk engagement, if you risk digging in and going deep, it will be worth it. And you will be changed by the experience. Now, I know I've asked a lot of questions today without a lot of answers. That's fairly typical for us. But now and between now and next week, when we will be having our pledge drive celebration, 10 o'clock, the meal here, as Marty was telling us, I ask you to think about the questions that I asked today. I ask you to think about how you want to be a part of the ongoing creation of this congregation. And think about what it is that you value and how much you value this congregation for yourself, for your family if you have one, and for the Quad Cities community. I cannot promise you eternal salvation or supernatural forgiveness for your sins, but what I can promise you is that here in the present, in the here and now, if we all work together, we can build a beloved community. If we all work together and build strong relationships with each other, we will go deep and we will be transformed. And if we all work together and welcomes everyone's gifts and talents with generosity, we will create the world that we dream about. May it be so.